Good people YouTube, I'm the Watch Idiot, and it's my favorite time of the year again. I get to tally up how many times I wore each of my watches this year, because for those of you who are new, first of all, welcome in, I'm glad you're here, but I have taken a wrist shot every single day for the past 7 years. And because of that, I have empirical data about how many times I wear each watch, and also all sorts of other analytics like how many days I wore divers or GMT, Swiss watches versus Japanese watches, black dial versus not black dial watches, and also like how many times I wore watches over 42 millimeters. That's stuff we're gonna be talking about. I mean, I absolutely love looking through all these numbers and getting all this stuff. So in this video, we'll first go through my top 5 most worn watches of 2024, and then we'll get into the juicy wrist time results, details, all the good stuff. And since this is likely gonna be the last video of 2024, I just wanna take a moment and thank every single one of you, those of you who have been here from the start, those of you who are new, I mean, everyone who comments, everyone who watches, anyone who just has supported the channel at any point. It just really means so much to me, and yeah, it just makes me excited to do even more for you guys next year. I have a lot of plans going on over here. Oh, and also I am selling a whole bunch of watches, and I've cut the prices to like stupid levels, so I just want to be able to get 2025 started with a clean slate. So yeah, check out the pinned comment if you want more information on that. Anyway, let's get into it. So disclaimer time, the watch that gets counted for the day is the main watch of the day. Sometimes I do wear, said watch all day, but sometimes I also wear my other watches because, I mean, so many of us just wear multiple watches throughout the day. I'm no different. So drumroll, the most worn watch of 2024 is actually a little bit more to say, but it is not a dive watch, which is shocking, but it was the Longines Spirit Time Hodinkee edition, the full grade 5 titanium one. And yeah, this thing is simply incredible. And in previous videos, I mentioned that it smashed all kinds of wrist time records early on in its ownership. So previously the record was 60 days for a single watch, which was the Pelagos about like 5 years ago or something. And that was mind blowing. Other watches sometimes got close to it. I mean, the Black Bay Pro got really close to it at like 58 days 2 years ago when it was released. But the Spirit Time was worn 117 times. I mean, it absolutely dominated the beginning of the year. And if you want more details about the watch itself, check out the review video that I did. But in short, the size is perfect. The finishing of the case is just next level stuff. Same thing goes for the steel versions. And the fact that it's got a titanium bezel is just perfect. And also it's just such a nice change of pace from all my dive watches that I usually wear. And finally, it's super, super light. So it is unbelievably comfortable. And that's really important to me. So I mean, what a watch, my God. In P2, it was none other than the Omega Speedmaster 300M with 47 days, a very strong performance given that I got it in the end of September-ish. And I finally gave in, and this was my first ever rebuy of a watch, and it was just because the experience is so unique, and I've been wanting to get this watch again for years after I sold it. I mean, the case, the handset indices, the comfort, all awesome, but it really comes down to how insanely good and different the ceramic dial looks in various lighting conditions, and also how awesome that brushed case looks as well. Next up, P3 was the Tudor Pelagos, of course, but it was the FXD this time around, not the original one. 29 days, and I'm gonna be doing a video about why I bought it in the first place and my thoughts as an owner so far, and as an owner of the original Pelagos very, very soon. But the thing has been such a unique experience once again, especially for someone who is a full-on bracelet guy. It was just so surprising. I mean, this will be getting a lot more wear next year, and I think it's gonna do especially good during the summer, which I was not expecting. But again, I'll explain later. Next in P4, it's the Zen U50 with 24 days, and it's been worn more on the side because it's a quartz, so it's always good to go when I'm too lazy to set the time on my mechanical watches. But it also works well because it wears like a 40 millimeter watch and it's 12 millimeters thick, so it just is so easy to wear. And all while having one of the coolest dials out there because it's oil filled, meaning the dial looks like it's like a flat sticker on the underside of the crystal. It's absolutely unreal, and I try to capture it in video and it does a pretty good job, but it's even better in real life. And then on top of everything, because it's oil filled, the water resistance is 5,000 meters, which is the Titanic and then an extra sea dweller underneath that. it's just insane. Finally, in P5, it's the Seiko SPB383, the Marine Master 200 GMT that I got last year with 19 days. And I said before that if I could have only one Seiko out of my dozen plus, probably way more than dozen, it would be this one, because the case and dial design is just so pure Seiko and striking, and it's a GMT watch, and I absolutely love GMT watches, as we will see in the next section. So looking back, I think this year has been a year that I tried and really enjoyed new things, because pilot's watches weren't really my thing at all, or honestly any watches with numerals on the dial to a certain extent. So yeah, seeing that the Spirit Zulu time absolutely dominated is amazing to see, but it does have a rotatable bezel, so I didn't stray too far from my requirement of a watch having timing capabilities. So basically any rotatable bezel on a watch, or a chronograph, or just anything to mark a start time, basically. So in terms of those watches with timing capabilities, I wore them 339 days out of the 353 days being counted, which is 96% of my wrist time. And this number for timing capability watches has been like this since the very start. It's never dipped below 90%. I think the lowest it's gone is maybe like 92, 93% in the early days when I had more fixed bezel watches. So yeah, this is how I realized that I should probably think twice about getting a watch with a fixed bezel, you know, whether it's a time only piece or a GMT watch like my Explorer 2 that I had in the Black Bay Pro. But I was thinking about it, and it was 2018, you know, when I was trying all kinds of watches, and that year is what set the precedent that I liked and preferred dive watches. But I want to try and test the waters again, especially because it's been a long time, and it's been happening with this Raymond Weil Milsim over here. I mean, oh god, what a absolutely fantastic watch. Video is going to be coming out of this soon. I've been wearing this for like 8 days straight now, so yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, that's crazy. So moving on with the stats, how many watches did I wear more than 15 days during the year? 8 watches were total. So that comes out to 285 days, 80.7% of the year I was wearing 8 watches. And I'm kind of glad that this is the case, because it means that I'm wearing my main watches, and I'm wearing a lot of my watches a lot of the time, instead of wearing a whole bunch of watches and none of the watches getting any love. I mean, I remember it was like I think it was in 2021, like my most worn watch was worn like 35 days, which, I mean, that's not very much. So next up, how many days did I wear dive watches, specifically dive watches? And that's 210 days, 59.5%, which is down from last year's 70%, but that's mainly down to the Spirit Zulu time taking up so much time. So yeah, I mean, it goes without saying, I love dive watches, if you haven't noticed already. But the other kind of watch that I love are GMTs, and I wore a GMT, or at least a watch with a GMT function, 161 times, 45.6% of my wrist time for the year. Again, confirming that I love GMT watches. And that's despite me not traveling 161 days. I just like the way they look. And I mentioned that because I noticed some people on my other GMT reviews saying that they like the watch, but they won't get it because they just don't get enough use out of a GMT function, which is fair enough, but watches as a whole are pretty unnecessary, I guess, like beyond G-Shocks, but no one really needs to also know what the phase of the moon is, and yet so many of us like moon phases. I absolutely love moon phases. I think the same thing should go for GMTs. If you find it useful, then it's super useful, but even if you don't find it useful or you don't really need it, it's still just really cool to see on the wrist. Next up are watches 42 millimeters and up. And I do this just to see if my claim that my ideal and most favorite watch size is 38 to 40 millimeters is backed by the numbers. And it's a yes and no, because I wore 42 millimeter plus watches 130 days, 36.8% of the time. And yeah, that's really just down to the Seamaster, the FXD, and the Marine Master 200 GMT being technically 42.1 millimeters, even though it wears much smaller, like a big 40 millimeter or like definitely like a 41 millimeter watch. I guess that just goes to say that I love watches of all sizes, even watches that are bigger than 42 millimeters. But weirdly enough, it's down quite a bit compared to last year, which was 175 days with 42 millimeter plus watches, 48.7%, which was definitely surprising. And I've said this before, I love black dial watches. I mean, they're my absolute bread and butter, as many of you have pointed out in my State of the Collection video, but I also do enjoy different colors of watches, especially my Captain Willard, the Ice Diver. That blue is just insane looking. But my numbers do show that I do love black watches. More, I mean, 288 days were worn for black dials, 81.6%, and 64 days for non-black dials. And I mean, that doesn't sound like very much, but it's also not an insignificant number. I mean, it's enough to warrant buying and wearing other dials. Now, bracelets versus rubber straps, and I'm generally a full-on bracelet guy, but certain watches are just better on rubber straps. And this year, I've worn a lot of watches that happen to be just really good on a particular strap, especially, I think now I am just in general moving more towards wearing watches on straps. So the final numbers for bracelets were 181 days, 51.3%, and 172 days for everything else, 48.7%. And that is much more split down the line than I thought it would have been, especially me thinking that I'm very much a bracelet guy. And finally, Swiss versus Japanese, and usually the split is pretty close, but this year with the Spirit Zulu time, the Seamaster, and the FXD, the Swiss absolutely dominated with 264 days, 74.8% versus 77 days, 21.8% for the Japanese. But I mean, that can just happen depending on which watches I just happen to like wearing more. So there you have it. Let me know down in the comments what your most worn watch of 2024 was, and also, I guess, what your general preferences are in terms of watches. And yeah, until the next video, probably next year in 2025, which is crazy to hear, but yeah, good day.